excited to have Scott Arizala, excited to have all of you with us. And we're doing something new via Expert Online Trainings webinar series this year, and that is talking specifically month to month about the process of training staff. So 2 years ago, we did a series of webinars that was really focused on training staff, that is to say, what techniques can staff use. Last year, we did a series for parents, and this year we're really excited because the series we're doing is really focused on how directors can be in a better position to provide the training. So 2 years ago, our target audience was staff. Last year, it was parents, and this year we're really excited to be offering some direct advice to those of you who train your seasonal staff. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know Scott Arizala already, he's one of the masters of this domain. So teaching people how to train their staff and providing a lot of direct service. I'll let Scott say more about what he does, and then I'm going to moderate some questions.
Hi, thanks, Chris. Yes, so my name is Scott Arizala. I am a summer camp consultant and trainer, as well as a owner and director of several summer camps in the past, currently just one right now. And as you know, Chris alluded to, one of the things that I spend most of my professional time on is training, whether that's writing curriculum, training for trainers, on the ground doing training with frontline staff, both in summer camps as well as in other sort of areas of youth development, schools, after school. Those questions revolve around behavior. So I'm super excited everyone decided to join us. I'm excited for the folks in the future who will be able to watch this on video. And I will poke fun at you a little bit, Chris, because the title of this webinar is How to Discipline Kids, or some like kind of rigid, hardcore statement. Yeah. So I was just like, wow, we'll try and get into it a little bit around.
Yeah, well, you know me, I'm very rigid and hardcore, so that's what I was trying to do.
So am I. I just took my bow tie off for the webinar. There you go. Normally, I'm a little bit more put together than that. Yeah. Well, there are a few people who are writing us that they're having a little bit of trouble with the video. You and I are seeing smoothly streaming video, so okay. I hate to say it, but if there's a video, is catching or frozen, might be happening on the receiving end. So what I would suggest, if you can hear my voice, but you're having a little trouble with the video, is turn the Wi-Fi off elsewhere in your room or in the building. Turn the Wi-Fi off on your phone so that you can collect as much bandwidth as possible on the device you're using to watch this webinar, and then you're going to see some smoother video. Also looks like the reconnect button is working for some people. There's a reconnect button at the top, so maybe
okay, cool. That. Yeah, so I'll type a quick message here. If your video is hitching a bit, turn off all other Wi-Fi devices and reconnect. Scott, my first question is this. Again, this is a webinar not focused on direct techniques that we might use with young people, but how we're preparing our staff. And, kind of poking fun at the title, discipline, which leads to my first question. How do we help staff understand the role that they play and the limits of that role? They can't do some of the things that parents are allowed to do, like mild physical discipline or swearing at kids. And I'm not saying those are good disciplinary techniques. How do you help educate staff about what their disciplinary or behavior management role is?
Yeah, no, I love the question, and I think the first answer to that is to step back and to not think about behavior management or discipline as a sort of singular idea that we're going to cover once in a 1 hour bit of our training or in one workshop. I've taken to talking about behavior in all different kinds of contexts. One of the ones that I found particularly poignant, I guess, for staff is to talk about it in the framework of customer service and the idea that every interaction that we have with a kid they're leaving with some impression about that interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And my sort of push on staff is that, you know what, that almost all the time, those interactions are revolving around behavior. Now, not in the classic sense, right? Because we say behavior and we think some kids acting up, some kids being a jerk to other kids, being exclusive, whatever, right? Or not listening to a staff member. Yes, of course, we would label all those things as behavior as well. But I think the first step for all of us as directors is to sort of take it out of its little silo and understand that every interaction that we're having with kids can and probably should revolve around the choices that they're making, what they're talking about, the things they're doing and saying, their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I would start with sort of framing the whole conversation with staff, is really taking it out and saying, okay, and using it as a thread through training. In every discussion, every topic, from our most boring stuff like policies and procedures and where to get your mail and when to do your laundry for overnight camps, all the way through really heady, important, like we got to go through all the health department standards or ACA stuff or whatever. Can we use behavior as a thread that we can keep coming back to? What does this idea, what does this topic mean for our interactions with kids? What is our everything from big ideas like our mission statement to really small things like how we're choosing our daily activities? How is this relevant to kids and their choices and their behavior? I think if we frame it differently as the directors, it can be more effective as far as then, to your point, the techniques that we teach staff as far as when there's bad behavior or praise and recognition when there's good behavior.
All right, so if I understand what you're saying, one of the most important things for directors and owners of summer youth programs to understand is that when they get their seasonal staff, they need to help those seasonal staff frame their jobs appropriately. Think about customer service. Think about the magnitude of responsibility that you have caring for other people's children, and think about the meaning of behavior as it's happening in this context.
Yeah.
Right. So right away, I see a different way of looking at this. And I think most new staff want to know, okay,
what can we do to prevent some of those bad behaviors from happening in the first place, right? So it's those two ideas. When it comes to specifically your question though, right? What can I do to punish a kid? So here's what I say. Let's first of all take apart the idea of discipline, right? I think we've gotten it a little bit wrong. If you go to dictionary.com or you open your dictionary on your bookshelf or whatever, punishment is about the third or fourth definition under the most attached to. Because the real answer to your question, what can I do when a kid acts wrong? How can I punish a kid? You know, if we're going to be honest, not very much.
Yeah.
Right? Because let's break it down. What can we do? We can remove them from the activity, right? Almost all punishment starts with well, you and I are going to have to talk about what just happened. So we're going to come away from the activity. I'm going to break up the fight. I'm going to take you away from the program specialist that you're being disrespectful to. I'm going to do whatever, take them out of this thing and talk to them, and then proceed down the sort of elevation strategy at your particular camp. So I'm a counselor, I'm talking to you, it's not becoming clear, you're doing the behavior over and over and over again, I talk to you every time. What do? Well, I got to elevate it to my unit leader or my head counselor or whatever that sort of elevation strategy is. Sitting out of activities, removal from a primary group. So sometimes we've taken kids out of that sort of social group, that primary group that they're really comfortable in, and put them in a different group, and that sometimes curbs the behavior. I've done things like behavior contracts and trying to put down on a piece of paper what's okay and what's not okay. But at the end of the day, especially as frontline staff, you don't have a lot of options, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you sort of spoke earlier about we have, as camp staff, we have limited options as you know, in comparison to parents, right? Mm-hmm. And my only pushback on that is that I don't know, I've got an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 4-year-old. There's a lot of discipline happening in my house all the time, and guess what? I don't have a lot of strategies other than I'm pulling you out of that activity. We're talking about it. Maybe you have to have some time by yourself, like, timeout style, but we call it kind of like cool down, stuff like that. But there's not a lot of things that we can do other than having some good conversation, role modeling really good choices, and then when they are making those good choices, really praising them and highlighting those things so that they know how to get some of that more positive attention. I know that's not a satisfying answer.
Yeah, well,
and
no,
I think that's the most real answer I could give.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, because you started by emphasizing how important it is to frame up the job for our staff and let them know that we're not going to begin by endowing them with a repertoire of punishments. We want them instead to think about these young people as developing organisms that are responding to their environment, and what looks like a misbehavior and might very well be actually is a message that they're uncomfortable or they're homesick or they're shy or
or that they don't have the skill set to do something better, exactly. The skill set or sort of support, right? Like I may be able to tell you how I'm feeling, but if I don't come from an environment or I'm not used to a kind of environment or I don't find myself currently in an environment that supports me articulating how I feel all the time, right. Is that my environment reacts more to when I just push you. Well, that's what I'm going to do. So I may have the skill set, the language expression skill set to tell you how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
But that might not be supported by the environment that I'm in or that I'm coming from, right? So yes, they might be shy, they might be homesick, there might be something other layered on top of what's going on. That's not the issue between Scott and Chris on the soccer field, right? It's this other issue layered on top. And then on top of that, you got to think about, well, what's their skill set? What can they do? And again, this is part of the framework, right? We have to approach kids like we want to approach each other, like assuming the best. Like, look, if every kid had the right skill set and the right support, they would do the right thing. You get better stuff when you do the right things, right?
So that's a different way of thinking about discipline, not as we're going to exact punishments or, youth leaders are more likely to, outside of stopping something which is a safety concern, get our staff ready to, extricate kids, pull them aside, and start having a conversation when they're calm enough about, okay, what was going on? And to your point, what could you do differently next time? Now, what would you say to directors who, are listening now and say, okay, that sounds good, but that takes time. And if I've got, 2 staff with 50 kids, handle that.
Okay. So the first thing I'm going to say is like a few miles back before that. If you have a situation where you have 2 staff members playing kickball with 50 kids, you're already doing a bunch of stuff wrong.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to diss anybody as far as their program or whatever, but when I say wrong, this is a soapbox, Chris, you have heard me stand on now several times. I think people on the webinar, everyone's going to hear me say this over and over and over again in the next few years. I don't think that we're staffing our camps appropriately. I think we're using the ratios that the health department and ACA and everybody else gives us as like a standard truth, as opposed to a minimum ratio, which I believe is kind of how the idea of ratios was inspired. What's the minimum amount of adults we want around per number of kids? And so I believe that we are chronically understaffed as an industry, and that I fully understand that as a camp director myself who has to hire young people to work at my camp, I fully understand the can of worms that I'm opening right now and how many issues I'm bringing up for everybody watching the webinar and frankly all the camp directors out there. I totally get it, and it's really tough and it's hard, especially if you're trying to find male staff. We all know that, right? We all know. And I feel like if you got 50 kids playing kickball, we should probably have 10 staff down there, because then that one-on-one moment where some kid gets pulled aside, bang, okay. We have nothing is going to happen to the kickball game. We have that moment where we have this really thoughtful conversation. The other sort of, I wouldn't necessarily call it a soapbox, but the other thing that I've been saying a lot is I don't think we give kids enough time and space. Oftentimes a kid does something and we're like, hey man, that's not cool. You got to go sit over there and we're going to talk about this. I'll be back in 3 minutes and we're going to talk about it. Well, I don't know, last time you got really upset, maybe at your kids or with one of your colleagues at work or with, your spouse or whatever, but 3 minutes later was not an appropriate amount of time for you as an adult. I bet, Chris, like you didn't want to talk about, that you lost your temper a little bit or you were a little bit sharper on that comment or you slammed that door and it wasn't appropriate. 3 minutes later you probably didn't want to talk about it. I think that's a courtesy we afford each other as adults that we don't give to kids. And so a lot of times I want to just say, hey man, like, okay, why don't we give them 15 minutes? And I'm not saying like leave them alone. I'm saying check in, whatever, have them cool off, give them a little time and space and say, hey man, you know what? That wasn't appropriate. You and I got to talk about that. We're going to check in later after dinner. Let's get back into the game. Bam. Normalize the schedule, get back going. Because everybody on this webinar has had the experience of talking to a kid well after the fact and when they've calmed down. And 99.9% of kids are like way more articulate, like can kind of see the problem way better, can understand like what they did or what they didn't do that sort of led to it in just like a much more clear way if we give them some time and space. So again, the ratio is important. So hopefully you're never going to be in a situation where you have two adults and 50 kids. If you are, my feeling is let's give them some more time and space. Let's really allow them that emotional space and then circle back around. Maybe once the kickball game is over and we've got more staff or we're showing up for pick up at day camp and all the rest of the staff are there and I can kind of pull the kid over and have a bit of conversation, or we're at resident camp and we're in that after dinner kind of downtime and it's a little bit more unstructured so I can talk to the kid or whatever the case may be.
Well, I think it's really, again, in providing information that is helpful to directors and how they treat staff about behavior management is so good for everyone to hear. You can give your staff permission to take their time, and even though the staff member, will feel some urgency about addressing a behavior problem immediately, that child or children will be more receptive to whatever wise counsel you want to provide when they've calmed down. And there's nothing wrong with, and lots of things right with, saying to a kid of any age, whether it's a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old, hey buddy, listen, I can see that you're having a tough time. Have a seat. The game's going to go on here for a little bit, and maybe in a couple innings we'll chat, or we'll talk after the game, or whatever it might be. And you're right. People have different labels for timeout, and I think once kids are teenagers, you got to call it a break or something.
Yeah, cool off. Yeah. So Marcy in the chat asked a really interesting follow-up question. She asked how much time is too much time after the sort of moment for learning to still be relevant. And Marcy and everybody else, I would love it if I could give you like the formula right now and be like, all right, well, times their age by 5, and that's how much, but I can't, because and I'll use the opposite example actually as my sort of reasoning here. Sort of the conventional wisdom on praise, right? Like what we always talk, we talk about praise and when should you praise kids and all that. And if you ask anybody, what's the conventional wisdom on the timing of praise? People will say, well, of course, immediately, right? Like they just did the thing. You praise them for their behavior so that it's easier in a kid's mind to attach like the positive attention they're getting from the adult right now.
Right.
To the thing they just did, right? It's like, well, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. But okay, so Chris, you've worked with thousands of kids before. Do you know kids that would just love that? Would just in the moment just like love to be praised right there out loud and proud in front of everybody, right? Like just
it depends, right?
Yeah, right. You know kids that absolutely love it. Do you know kids that would absolutely be mortified by the fact that you just did that, like in front of everybody, and like shriek away and like wilt like a flower because they can't stand that?
Right.
So when we talk about praise, one of the things I talk about all the time is like, of course, go with your gut, go with conventional wisdom, but it's up to you as the frontline counselor to get to know these kids, and you got to watch what happens. You got to watch when that kid like kind of shies away, or when that kid just like revels in the attention, or when that kid like it doesn't matter the timing, They don't want to be talked about good or bad in front of anybody.
Right.
They want the private conversation. Or the kid that has some, like, maybe not a diagnosis, but like an auditory kind of processing issue. Maybe that's the kid that you write a note to and says, man, that was really awesome. And you kind of slip it to them so that they can have that full experience without, having the additional challenge of like processing what you're just saying out loud. None of that would change if we're talking about a negative behavior. So yes, the conventional wisdom is they do the thing, you enact some sort of punishment for the thing, and they can easily in their mind put together, I did this bad thing happened, I'm not going to do it again. Okay, great. I totally get that. But let's pay attention to the kid. Some kids are going to respond better with only 5 minutes of a time to cool off. But we all know kids that are like, okay, I just kind of want to get through this, like get this part done because I'm embarrassed by what I did and I know I can do a better job next time.
Right.
And then we all know kids that are like, need way longer to process anything before they're going to be able to come up with some good answer to like, well, buddy, what do you think, you can do differently next time? And you can just hear it, right? My 4-year-old Griffin upstairs, he's always going to say stuff immediately. Find an adult and walk away and tell him I don't like it. It's like, yeah, man, you know all the answers, but you just don't do any of that stuff.
Right.
So what do we need? We need a little bit more time so you remember to do one of those things.
Yeah.
As opposed to being able to say it,
And I think, so you're pointing out yet another wonderful parameter for directors to keep in mind, that much of what they've been teaching has great value. For example, praise that is positive, immediate, specific, and true. And there are some variations on that, such as delayed praise or, delayed teaching about an alternative to, bad behavior, that in a lot of ways are more powerful. 2 hours later, walking over to some kid on your way to lunch and putting your hand on his shoulder or her shoulder and saying, I saw how you kept your cool when the referee, called that ball out. And I think you and I both thought it was in, but like, that's good sportsmanship.
Yeah.
And the fact that you've noticed it and still remember it a couple hours later or a day later, that can also be very powerful.
Yeah.
So,
and when it comes to discipline, and the sort of opposite side of this, I think that in and of itself is a great, not only technique to share, but if we back out a little bit and we're talking about how to sort of teach some of these things, right?
Yep.
Noticing is one of the big things because at the end of the day, let's throw some percentages around. I haven't done the research, so I'm sorry, Dr. Thurber. I probably am going to get this percentage wrong. I would say 75%, 3/4 of bad behavior is so mild that most
for sure,
counselors just don't even say anything, right? They allow the teasing until it crosses the line, till it's a little too hard. Right? They allow the exclusivity until it's like clear somebody has like hurt feelings about it. Right? They take the 2 or 3 or 4 disrespectful comments before the 5th disrespectful comment, and they're like, you know what? It's not okay to be disrespectful to me or to other stuff. You know what I mean? So the point I'm trying to make is that same moment that you have with a kid where you're like, wow, I saw how you handled that bad call in soccer. Notice when you guys were all sitting down or all going to the basketball court to play your 3-on-3 game, you didn't invite Chris over. And he got into something else, building the blocks of what discipline really is, which is having enough self-control and understanding how my actions affect everybody else.
Yeah. Well, as you know, and we're almost out of time, but one of my favorite ways to train staff is to have everybody look at the same example. So we could look at a case study from a previous summer, but to do what you're describing, this getting better at noticing, I love showing staff a movie clip. And I think the key about the clip is that it contained multiple people, and if a bunch of them are kids, so much the better. And without any other agenda, just play and no intro, play the clip, maybe 5 minutes, 10 at the most, and then ask them to write down, what did you notice? Mm-hmm. Just that. And then, different people will notice different things, and you can make the point that you just made about the importance of noticing, and then you can rewind and play it again, and with a heightened sense of awareness and having heard lots of ideas from other people, see what else they saw. We tend to pigeonhole kids, good kid, bad kid, and then we look for kind of confirmatory evidence, right? We have a confirmatory bias. This kid that was a pain in the butt last year, just did this thing this summer. And now we're going to look for more things that align with our theory about that kid, that he has trouble behaving the right way. Whereas a good kid, we tend to notice more of the good behavior. We have to work against that bias and really do what you're suggesting. Notice the full range of behaviors, notice some of the subtle things, and work really hard to, as you said at the beginning, discuss and devise alternatives for the less desirable behavior, and do what we can do to notice and praise the desirable behavior. And I always have staff say, like, look, I'm not going to run around camp going, good job, good job, good job, good job. And we've never asked people to do that. No. But like just making eye contact or smiling or a wink or a pat on the shoulder or like, that's sometimes all you need. It's a split second, but it reminds kids periodically that the adults do care, are noticing, and are making a distinction between what's appropriate and inappropriate. So I'll let you have it.
I would challenge any staff member that said that to me. I would challenge them to go, I don't want you to run around saying good job, good job, good job all the time. But you know what I'd love for you to do is run around and in each moment, identify just quickly for yourself what would be 3 things right now that I would say good job about or that I would praise. Because again, oftentimes, and again, this goes back to like, how are we training staff? We don't even see positive behavior as like choices sometimes. We see it as status quo. Like everyone goes to arts and crafts. They're all doing either the project or junk box or they get a class. Like this is what's supposed to happen at arts and crafts. Right? As opposed to seeing all the individual great choices kids are making. Right? And again, are you going to go around and spend the entire hour saying good job, good job, good job? No, of course not. But what you are going to do is notice those things. And with individual kids, you are going to praise when it's important for that kid. The kid who gets a ton of praise, who's one of the quote really good kids, all the staff really like him or her. They don't need over the top praise. They don't need it all the time. They get that all the time. What they need other things socially versus the kid sitting right next to them that may need more of that stuff. So and how do you know that? Well, you pay attention to your kids. Your number one job as a frontline staff member, pay attention to your kids. And so if we're going to be talking to this group, group of directors about how do we train on this kind of stuff, this goes back to that thread I was talking about. You're doing your emergency procedure training, right? Or some sort of safety training. Well, do you know what emergency procedures are? It's paying attention to the details. Right? And so why not in the debrief for your emergency procedure training, why not talk about, so what does everything that we just did about running through the woods trying to find a missing camper, well, what does that have to do with discipline and behavior? And let your young staff try and figure out what you're talking about and spend 5 minutes in small groups going, what does it have to do with that? Well, we don't want them to freak out and run away, so we're not going to be too mean. Yeah, they're going to say some of those kinds of things, but then they're also going to be like, you know what? Scott was really specific about when there's an emergency procedure, about counting and noticing who I'm with right now. That he kept saying that over and over and over again. Well, that has something to do with the thing that he was talking about yesterday around noticing their behavior. And can we start putting some of these things together?
Yeah. Well, it's a great final thought. And our 30 minutes has gone by way too fast, but I'm grateful for your energy and your creativity, and most of all, giving us some new ideas about approaching the work that we do to prepare staff for interacting with kids in healthy ways. And that's what expert online training is all about. That's why we do this webinar series. Scott and I and the rest of the faculty at EOT have devoted our professional lives to trying to enhance the relationship that youth leaders cultivate with the young people they serve. So with apologies for some of the AV glitches a link to this recording, I want to thank the 100 of you who stuck with us, and we'll let you know that we'll inform you of November's webinar as well as the series as it progresses throughout May. So on behalf of Scott Arizala, I'm Chris Thurber for Expert Online Training, and we look forward to seeing you back here online with even better resolution, we hope, in November. So everybody take good care, and thanks for attending. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Chris.